Tonight, massive explosions in Beirut as Israel ramps up its attacks. Airstrikes rock Lebanon's capital as Emmanuel Macron calls for an end to arms shipments to Israel.
Shame on them. Israel will win with or without their support.
Thousands rally in cities around the globe to call for a ceasefire in the Middle East. Contamination concerns in northern Alberta.
We've buried a lot of people from rare cancers here in this community.
Allegations of a government cover-up as First Nations leaders point to local health issues. And the driving force of frustration with e-bikes and scooters.
Unhelmeted, untrained, uninsured joyrider.
Plus, a Canadian veteran competing on the world stage.
Wanting to represent Canada the best that I can, but also the military and the veterans.
Bringing compassion and pride to the Mrs. Universe pageant. Giselle!
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. Powerful new explosions rocked Beirut's southern suburbs as Israel expands its bombardment of the Hezbollah and Hamas militant groups in Lebanon. Today, the strikes also hitting a Palestinian refugee camp deep in the north for the first time. Thousands are trying to flee the widening conflict. CTV's Kamal Karmali starts us off.
Israel's military strength on full display across Lebanon Saturday. Explosions rocking the capital, killing dozens, shutting down hospitals. Airstrikes flattening homes in the east. A rare attack in the north, killing a Hamas leader, while Israeli troops continued their ground invasion in the south.
Israelis seem determined to do much more than simply establish a buffer zone in southern Lebanon, but are out to degrade as much as possible the capabilities of Hezbollah.
While Hezbollah sent missiles over northern Israel Saturday, Israel claims to have discovered Hezbollah tunnels in southern Lebanon. But the biggest blow seen Saturday may have been the disappearance of one of Hezbollah's own senior members. Hashim Safieddin, most likely to take over as Hezbollah's leader, has been out of contact since Friday. Today's escalation leading to a warring of words. The French president calling for an end to weapon shipments to Israel.
Shame on them. Israel will win with or without their support.
The world just as divided, leading up to the one-year anniversary of the October 7th Hamas attack. Pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli rallies broke out in major cities around the globe and across Canada.
This is a human cause, and it's across religion, across nationality.
And the world continues to hold its breath, waiting to see how Israel will respond to Iran's missile barrage from earlier this week. So far, Israel has not indicated anything is off limits, including targeting Iran's oil fields and nuclear sites. Heather.
Kamal, thank you. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has repeated Canada's calls for a ceasefire in the Middle East, blaming Hamas, Hezbollah, and Israel for the staggering number of civilians killed in the crossfire. He was speaking at the Francophonie Summit, and as CTV's Jeremy Sharon reports, the gathering of leaders of French-speaking countries has been overshadowed by conflict in the Middle East.
Bonjour à tous. French language the priority on paper in Paris. In his closing remarks at the Francophonie Summit, the Prime Minister focused on two key points: bolstering French education, especially in African countries, and pushing for more French content on big streaming platforms.
We have to put an end to this escalation of violence.
But it's the situation in Lebanon that took center stage in Paris, driving diplomatic discussions.
In these circumstances, our job is definitely to make sure that we get to a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel.
Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly met today with Lebanon's Information Minister, here in place of Lebanon's Prime Minister, who couldn't attend due to the conflict.
At this point, there's 6,000 people that have registered to get information that may be interested in leaving Lebanon.
Joly says about 1,000 people have left Lebanon so far on flights chartered by the federal government, with more flights available in the coming days, but many seats are not being taken up when they're offered.
If you are offered a seat, please take it. We know things are difficult, but we want to make sure that your safety and yours and the one of your family is ensured.
There is concern, though, over the airport in Beirut remaining a viable option for departures following bombings nearby this week.
It's important to ensure that civilian infrastructure like the Port of Beirut and the airport are properly protected and not struck. If the situation gets worse, as we are working very hard to try and prevent it from getting worse, it will be extraordinarily difficult for the tens of thousands of Canadians who are currently in Lebanon.
The International Organization of La Francophonie also issued a collective statement today expressing its support for Lebanon.
As the Prime Minister concludes his trip to Paris that was overshadowed by the situation in Lebanon, he returns home to deal with domestic issues like a dispute with Quebec Premier François Legault and a consistent effort by the opposition to topple his government. Jeremy Sherrill, CTV News, Paris.
With just 30 days until the U.S. election, both Vice President Harris and former President Trump made high-profile trips to battleground states. Donald Trump returned to the very stage where a gunman tried to take his life back in July.
For 16 harrowing seconds during the gunfire, time stopped as this vicious monster unleashed pure evil from his sniper's perch.
Speaking behind a shield of bulletproof glass, Trump rallied supporters in Butler, Pennsylvania, talking immigration and taking jabs at his political opponents. Security was ramped up for the event with a secure perimeter.
Over the past 8 years, those who want to stop us from achieving this future have slandered me, impeached me, indicted me, tried to throw me off the ballot, and who knows, maybe even tried to kill me.
Also in Butler, billionaire Elon Musk made an appearance at the rally. And Kamala Harris was in battleground North Carolina today, the Democratic nominee offering support to people in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Arson specialists are now investigating a fatal fire that ravaged a historic building Friday morning in Old Montreal. Police revealed today a mother and her 7-year-old daughter from France died, while 23 other people who were believed to be in the building escaped. CTV's Maria Saru with the new revealing security video.
Security footage shows a person in a hoodie appearing to kick down a door, and moments later, a person is outside the building as smoke billows out onto the street. Shortly after, a 5-alarm fire tears through the building in Old Montreal. The aftermath, fear and chaos. That's how Thomas Sower describes yesterday's scene at the hostel on Notre Dame Street East when the fire broke out.
When I stepped on the street, a girl came screaming in her pajamas. She's like, "There's a fire in the kitchen." So we went to look, and then the door or window exploded.
But even before that, Sower says he felt uneasy about staying at the hostel. His room didn't match the photos he saw online, and the windows wouldn't open.
They were more like 2 stripes of glass that were glued to the wall. The hotel seemed like a total scam.
Sean Mollett lives right across the street. What he saw is also seared into his memory.
I see this woman on a fire escape, and she's waving her hands and screaming, and then this huge cloud of black smoke sort of envelops her, and there are flames coming up from below.
City property records show this building is owned by the same person who owns the nearby Heritage Building on Place du Ville that was also destroyed by a fire last year, which killed 7 people. That fire was deemed criminal by Montreal police. Despite several bad online reviews, the Montreal Fire Service said the building was deemed safe in the spring of this year after the owner, Émile Benamour, was found to be violating fire safety codes last year. Benamour told CTV through his lawyer he was shocked to learn of the deaths. Quebec's public safety minister could not confirm whether arson caused the fire, but he says he's looking into combining the inquiries.
It's going to be more rapid to have conclusion concerning these two events.
He adds that the hostel is now a crime scene. Maria Saru, CTV News.
A remote community in northern Alberta, made up of multiple First Nations, is demanding action to deal with potentially cancer-causing contamination. Local leaders claim the federal government first learned of the issue 7 years ago and say it was only revealed to the community by a third party this summer. They're calling it a cover-up and a case of environmental racism. CTV's Andrew Johnson reports from Fort Chipewyan.
It's an idyllic spot on the tip of Lake Athabasca, about 200 kilometers north of Fort McMurray. But locals believe beneath the surface in Fort Chipewyan is a dirty, potentially deadly secret.
Seems like when they get caught in an act, they don't know where to go.
They claim there's been a government cover-up in the area around what locals call the Big Dock. This summer, low water levels on the Athabasca River prompted local leaders to ask Transport Canada to dredge the area. They say the request was refused, so they looked into hiring a contractor of their own, who then dropped a bombshell.
This thing I can't touch because federal government did some tests under it and they found it to be contaminated.
Turns out a report into contamination was produced for the federal government back in 2017. But for 7 years, locals insist no one said a thing to them, so they've continued to fish and swim. The site is listed as a medium priority on the federal contaminated sites inventory. Transport Canada says it can't dredge the site because it would move contaminated sediment, and that it's working on a remediation plan. Federal Transport Minister Anita Anand's office adds, "There is no risk to human health based on the Transport Canada risk assessments that have been done over the years." People here strongly disagree.
We've buried a lot of people from rare cancers here in this community, and you have to live in this community in order to know the truth about what's happening here.
An Alberta government report released a decade ago did find higher than usual rates of bile duct cancer in Fort Chipewyan, but the health ministry says there hasn't been a new case registered here since 2017. Dangerous contaminants aren't the only concern. Low water levels are threatening travel here on the Athabasca River. For a town you can only drive into in the winter, that's a big deal, especially during wildfire season, when if you can't fly, the water is the only way out.
With water going down and we're not able to get out and not able to escape like the fire that happened.
Chief Adam fears a lack of action could eventually threaten his people's entire way of life.
You won't be able to swim in it, you won't be able to eat the fish from it, you won't be able to eat the livestock that go to it whatsoever, and most of all, won't be able to live there anymore.
A bleak future that could see a community forced to pack up and leave. Andrew Johnson, CTV News, Fort Chipewyan, Alberta.
There are calls for enhanced safety regulations for e-bikes and scooters. Advocates say the country has fallen behind and lacks consistency. Not all provinces are up to speed. And as CTV's Colton Prale tells us, it seems Canadians want these drivers to have a license.
This e-bike turned Victoria Windrum from a weekend warrior to an everyday cyclist.
For me, it has completely opened up my world. I don't have a car, and it means I don't have to take public transit.
Windrum is far from alone. Canadian retailers expect to sell over 100,000 e-bikes next year, turning into a $2 billion industry by the end of the decade. But new polling shows over half of Canadians believe electric bikes and scooters should require a license to operate.
I do think that all cyclists, including scooter riders, bicyclists, e-bikers, should have to do some sort of road rules test. I think that's important for anybody on the road.
Disability advocates have long campaigned against e-scooters. They say sidewalk riding and parking poses a unique risk to those with vision and mobility issues. And while licensing requirements could help,
it's not enough, because a licensed uninsured joyrider is still a dangerous uninsured joyrider.
In July, Quebec banned the sale and use of electric mopeds and scooters that don't meet federal safety standards, like engine power. In Toronto, e-scooters have never been legal, even if it doesn't look that way on city streets. Experts say municipalities haven't reacted fast enough to ensure everyone's safety as technology changes.
We have these services that come out that provide these additional choices for people, and we need to have cities that are more nimble and more able to actually accommodate, react, and sometimes fine-tune their policies.
In Canada, a license is only needed to operate power-assisted bikes and scooters in Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador, and only if you're under the age of 18. Heather.
All right, Colton, thank you. Coming up after the break.
Sometimes it might be best for you to make a different choice.
Why frequent fizzy drinks could be a danger to your health. Staying hydrated is important to your health, but doctors want you to watch what you're drinking and how much. A new study has researchers keeping tabs on frequent fizzy drinks that could increase your chance of a stroke. CTV's Paul Hollingsworth explains.
Researchers studied more than 13,000 people who had suffered a stroke, and they collected data on what they were drinking.
Fizzy drinks, fruit juice drinks, and water. And within tea, we looked at black tea, green tea, and other types of tea.
The study found stroke risk worsened when multiple drinks were consumed daily. Fizzy drinks, both with sugar and artificially sweetened, can increase the chances of having a stroke by 22%. The increased risk jumps to 37% with fruit juice consumption.
Or you walk into a grocery store and you can see some 100% fresh squeezed actual fruit juice. And then you see lots of other fruit drinks that are made from concentrates that have lots of additives and preservatives and lots of sugars and extra things.
The study also found drinking 7 glasses of water each day could reduce your risk for stroke.
We haven't found a cure for anything. We haven't found a magic cure to prevent everything from happening.
Dr. Andrew Smith's earlier research showed more than 4 cups of coffee a day can also lead to higher stroke risk. Smith says some types of tea have the opposite effect.
We found that with 3 to 4 cups a day of black tea or green tea, you reduced your chance of stroke by about a third. What was interesting to us from that was that benefit was not seen for people who chose to add milk to their tea.
Dr. Christopher Labos is skeptical about some of this research because he says accurate data is hard to collect.
When you're asking people to average out their food consumption over years, I'm not convinced that this type of approach amounts to much more than sort of a rough guess.
According to Smith, the purpose of this research was to provide information and education.
Sometimes it might be best for you to make a different choice.
Hoping to give people the tools to minimize the risk of having a stroke. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Halifax.
Still ahead, from the military to the Mrs. Universe pageant. A Canadian veteran makes history on the international stage. A Canadian veteran is marking a military milestone, trading her combat uniform for a sash and tiara. Mrs. Canada Universe is now taking her powerful presence and message to the world stage. CTV's Kathy Lee has her story.
Stitching everything by hand.
Each of these poppies is a symbol of remembrance and respect, telling the stories of those who've served.
Yeah, and this netting is
sent to Giselle Drew Walsh by veterans across the country. The dress, a moving tribute she will wear at the Mrs. Universe pageant in South Korea, making history as the first Canadian veteran to do so.
The biggest pressure is honestly just wanting to represent Canada the best that I can, but also the military and the veterans.
Serving in the military for 16 years, primarily in education and training, the Albertan has tirelessly advocated for soldiers and their families who suffer from PTSD.
Giselle!
And pageantry serves as a unique and larger platform for her message, something she spoke about at the airport en route to the international competition.
We have lost more soldiers to suicide since the time of Canada's participation in the war in Afghanistan than the soldiers that unfortunately lost their lives while there. I've seen firsthand what post-traumatic stress disorder can do to somebody who's struggling and doesn't have adequate resources.
Research shows only 20.6% of Canadian Armed Forces veterans released after 2015 have received treatment for combat-related post-traumatic stress disorder, a startling reality some say isn't highlighted enough and often gets forgotten.
We still have thousands of troops deployed in places like Latvia and the Middle East, but the public has moved on to newer topics. And so I think having someone like Giselle doing pageantry, hitting a new audience, being the first veteran that won a national competition, having a train made out of handmade poppies, I think that's just going to spark a new conversation.
Kind of cascading like this.
A conversation Drew Walsh hopes will continue to spread to more audiences. Kathy Lee, CTV News, Calgary.
One of the world's most famous soccer stars made a Canadian cameo today in Toronto.
Get to that in a second.
A loud roar for Lionel Messi coming off the bench for Inter Miami. He was on the field for the lone goal of the match in his team's 1-0 victory over Toronto FC. After the break, pedaling for Parkinson's. The unconventional cycle across the country. Imagine the creativity needed to complete a cross-country cycling trip, all from inside your garage. We'll leave you tonight with a Newfoundland man's determination to keep moving to help him adapt to life with Parkinson's disease. Here's CTV's Garrett Barry.
Robert Emberley's garage has been a home base for a unique journey.
I step up here.
It's here, over countless days, Robert has delicately mounted his bike and pedaled, the equivalent of a cross-Canada trip, about 7,000 kilometers.
The crowd were coming across Canada on their bikes for Parkinson's. And I said, I've done Newfoundland. Let's try Canada.
It's a complex system he made himself, rollers, a mirror, and sticker guides that Robert has to line up to stay upright.
I'll go back and forth like this. As long as I keep the happy face in the box, I'm okay.
It all helps Robert adapt to his Parkinson's disease, work on balance, and keep on moving.
Nothing's going to stop it. Maybe I can work with it, not against it.
Biking is a key part of his plan to stay active for as long as he can, even if he faced setbacks.
And I crashed. And I crashed. And I crashed.
He got right back on the bike, inspired by a favorite movie character in 80s hit Back to the Future.
Great Scott! Dr. Emmett Brown would say, I spent $350 on those things, and buddy, I better learn to use them.
It all started 14 years ago when Robert was diagnosed with Parkinson's and challenged himself.
What is the furthest thing from what I'm talking about to what I can do?
On Sunday, his cross-country journey finished at a Parkinson's Society fundraiser in St. John's, in front of an impressed crowd.
Yeah, I call him a maverick because he just pushes himself. He's always enjoyed riding. He's ridden long distances, and who wouldn't want to ride across Canada if you're an avid cyclist?
His sister even sent a little bit of West Coast water to pour over his bike and mark the end, for now, of this cycling journey. Garrett Barry, CTV News, St. John's.
And that is our newscast for this evening. I'm Heather Butts. Thank you for watching. Good night, and I'll see you again tomorrow.